Hello and welcome to the very first episode of The Bits with Joe and Nick. I'm Joe from Allplay Games.
And I'm Nick from Bitewing Games.
We're going to have to give credit to Joshua Bowman. Josh gave us a couple of ideas on naming the title, and the suggestion that he gave was The Bits and Pieces. And we kind of liked that idea of like how we're kind of looking at little tidbits of publishing information. And so I thought The Bits with Joe and Nick had like a nice assonance to it.
Yeah, I'm a fan of it as well, so thank you for that contribution. In case you missed, we did have an episode before this, even though this is our first more professionally done episode, perhaps.
This is our first titled episode.
Titled episode, there we go.
Yeah. So you can go listen to episode 0, which was kind of the dry test run, but I thought there was some really good discussion there about art in board games.
Absolutely. And we're back again with a new topic this week. Or today. We're doing this roughly once or twice a month, it seems like. But for today's episode, it's going to be all about finding and signing games. So this one could be helpful for publishers who are searching for their next project. This could be helpful for designers who are looking to pitch their games to publishers, but it could also be insightful and interesting for folks who just wonder, how does a game get signed and how do publishers decide what games to sign? Because there are far more designers pitching games than there are publishers signing them.
Yeah, and again, as Nick said, I don't know that we have a regular cadence to this yet, but at the end of the day, me and Nick are going to be having these conversations at least a couple times a month anyway. So basically what we decided to do is just put a microphone in front of ourselves and record it, and maybe some people will find it interesting and want to listen to it. So that's the whole premise, is you want to listen to two publishers running board game companies talk about different things in the industry. I hope you enjoy it.
Absolutely. So we'll jump right into it here. So finding and signing games. Joe, how do you find games to publish? And I think this is quite different for both of us.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think both of us have a pretty high output of games per year. But I would say that there's definitely one that we have in common, and I think maybe we can talk about that and maybe in a future episode deep dive a little bit onto the nuances of it. But one of the ways that I know both of us will go about finding new games to publish is republishing new editions of games that either have been overlooked or not available in the market in a very big way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are plenty of new designs coming out from various designers every year, every day. It seems like, we get plenty of pitches from that direction. But there are a lot of hidden gems out there too. So being able to find those that, for whatever reason, maybe the timing was wrong, maybe the way it was published wasn't as appealing to the market at that point, or just didn't work out the way the publisher and the designer hoped. But if we love the game and we have a new vision for it, then absolutely that's something we do quite regularly.
And it's not always hidden gems. So, for instance, one of the hidden gems I think Allplay found is we did a game by Reiner Knizia called Pollen. And Pollen, a lot of people don't know this, is actually a reimagining of Samurai the card game. So not Samurai, but Samurai the card game by Reiner Knizia, which those of us here in the office really loved that game and thought it was just severely overlooked. And when we went to BGG and looked at the reviews, a lot of people were like, this isn't as good as Samurai. And we're like, I feel like there was just a big miss when that game came out by calling it Samurai the card game. And even though it shares some thematic DNA, most of Reiner's games share some kind of DNA with other types of games that he's done. So I think like trying to like ride the coattails of Samurai really overshadowed that game. And so when we brought it back, we really wanted to separate it away from that Samurai universe and make it something that's a little bit more approachable and a little bit more like kept its distance from like what that previous edition was.
Absolutely. I think you learn a lot in retrospect, right? And you see how people comment on those older releases and how they react to it, and that gives you insight into maybe how can we release this in a better way or a more appealing way, or kind of change folks' perspective on this game, because oftentimes they are good games. They just maybe weren't presented in the best way. Kind of going along those lines, I guess, as most folks that are listening to us know by now, I'm a dentist, and then Kyle, the other Bitewing Games guy, is also a dentist. So that's what we spend a lot of our working time doing. And so I don't quite have as much time to take pitches from designers or travel to places and meet with designers. And so I find that I kill two birds with one stone, basically, by playing games that catch my attention that have already been published. And if I find a designer that kind of hits the spot for my tastes and for our target audience, then I'm often reaching out to that designer. So I know this way of finding new games isn't quite helpful for brand new designers who are unpublished, but for designers who are published, if I find and play your game and I love it, and I find that you have a consistent pattern or style of designing that hits the spot with me, then I'm often reaching out to that designer and saying like, hey, I already know you make the types of games that we're interested in. And that makes it a lot easier for us to get the ball rolling with new projects.
Yeah. For instance, I am a huge fan of Casper Lapps Games. He is the designer behind Magic Maze, Five Towers, That's Not a Hat. And so I reached out to him at Essen and was like, hey, I really like a lot of the games that you've put out. I think a lot of the games that you have put out would be great games if Allplay had gotten a hold of them. And so I was like, I'd really like to sit down with you and take some pitches. So like finding that a designer that has like the design style that you like and trying to reach out to them isn't always a bad way to go. I've had the same thing with the designer of Decrypto. And other designers like that, where I'm like, yes, like if I play a lot of games and I find that what that publisher has made a lot of in their lifetime are types of games that I feel like are a good fit for Allplay, I'm going to reach out to the publisher and go, hey, in the future, when you have games ready, consider Allplay as someone that you'd like to pitch first to.
Yeah, obviously Reiner Knizia is one of those designers for us. We also have some other published known designers that we're working with on future projects. But I think another one that stands out to me is designers who are active in the board game community and on social media. They make themselves known to publishers. For example, Ryan Courtney has historically been quite active on Twitter at the very least, and often on Facebook and stuff as well. And when we were just getting started at Bitewing Games, I had played Pipeline and Curious Cargo, and I knew that I enjoyed Ryan's style of games, and I saw that he tweeted about a hiking themed game that he was working on. And I figured at that point he had only published games with Capstone. I had figured he's probably doing this one with Capstone as well. That's where he's been publishing all of his games up to this point so far. But I reached out to him anyways, and I said, hey, we love hiking theme, and we like that style of theme. We'd love to make a game within that genre. So we're definitely interested if you're looking for a publisher. And it turns out he had not signed that game with anyone at that point. It turns out it was the third game in his Pipe trilogy, Trailblazers, which we did end up signing. So just the fact that he was talking about it on Twitter opened the door for us to reach out to him and sign that game and eventually publish it as Trailblazers.
Yeah, and some people think that it's like a very difficult thing to get some of these designers to work with smaller companies, but like Nick, your first trilogy of games, the Criminal Caper series, right, were all Reiner Knizia games, and he was more than happy to work with like somebody who's like, we've never published a game, we're two dentists, like, and Reiner Knizia is like, sure, you can have some games. And I mean, Reiner Knizia being like a special breed in that situation. Oh, yeah. But like even Ryan Courtney, like you probably reached out and got Trailblazers before the Criminal Caper series were actually on Kickstarter, I'd imagine. And like he had to have been willing to like take a chance with a publisher that hadn't really proven themselves in the market yet. And Trailblazers has turned into one of your biggest successes.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got lucky there and lucky with Reiner saying yes to a no-name publisher / company. I think it helps that some designers like Reiner have a whole host of prototypes and designs, and they're willing to work with both the small and the large publishers. And if you're a designer and you have smaller designs that you haven't necessarily spent a ton of your time and heart on, it's maybe easier to take a risk on a no-name publisher.
Yeah, and if you're a small publisher that's looking for games to publish, I mean, I can just tell you right now, I met with Casper Lapp and Bruno Cathala, both at Essen this year, to take pitches. Each one of them had like 35 prototypes that they were ready to show me. So these types of designers that are literally what I would call like journeyman designers, right? Like that's what they do. They design for a living. To them, it's not, oh, they're only going to publish with these big companies and they're more than happy to work with like companies of all sizes, because the more games that they put out into the market, the more chances there are of success. And you never know when one of your designs is actually going to be successful, like a Trailblazers. I actually would believe that Trailblazers has sold more copies than any of Ryan Courtney's other published designs at this point. In fact, I would almost guarantee that that's the case. Having some decent insight into what those numbers have looked like from different companies and being very close to Ryan himself.
Yeah, I believe that. I think part of it is, we can sell it at a cheaper and smaller package. We have different versions and things like that. And sometimes it's the theme or the art style or whatever that has more of a broad appeal than something like Pipeline, which is very well done, but also much heavier and more expensive. So it's a narrower target audience.
One of the other ways that I think designers can find games is a little bit different, because we're going to get into the bulk of the episode here soon. But one of the other ways that I think publishers can find games is finding very small print run games, or very very under the radar. So this is a little bit different than bringing back a second edition, right? That might be well known, might not, right? But something that has existed in the market at some point. But another way is to find very small print run games. So this is something Allplay does a lot. And a lot of these games are coming out of places like Taiwan or Japan, okay? So we do a lot of scouting at Tokyo Game Market looking for really fantastic designs. Now, the games that we're finding at Tokyo Game Market technically are published games, right? And I'm using quotation marks, right? Because most of these games, so for instance, we did a trick-taking game called Lunar, and people are like, oh, this is a reprint of Or Trick. And I'm like, okay, Or Trick was a game that was basically sold in a Ziploc bag and had 2 sheets of paper in it that you cut out and used a regular deck of cards to play with. 20 copies were sold at Tokyo Game Market about 2 years ago. So anybody that wants to have the argument that like Lunar is a reprint, I will die on that hill, because like I know prototypes that have had wider circulation than Or Trick has, right? Right. One of the other games that I often look at in our catalog that has been an evergreen seller for us is QE. QE is a game that I actually played well before Allplay ever published it. But QE was a game that was put on Kickstarter, and the designer, Gavin, makes these very weird, all wooden dexterity games, right? He's a very, very eclectic type of designer, right? But he designed this game called QE, and it was an auction game. It's very different from anything else that he's ever published. So he published this auction game. And in this auction game, this is the part that just kind of like blows my mind, right? It was this entire wood board. So like it didn't even come in a box. It didn't come with came with like a baggie of like magnetic dry erase tiles and this giant wooden board that he carved and etched and milled to like have like the game board material. And I remember me and my friends played it in that iteration, and we were like, this game is phenomenal and so wild. And at the time I was not working at Allplay, but Chad had also played it, because me and Chad have very similar taste in games, and he's like, man, this could be produced at such a different way. Like, this is not that complex of a game to produce. And so that kind of started us down the path of working on QE, which is to this day. In fact, I just approved a print, our next printing for QE, which I think is like the sixth printing that we've done as a company for QE. And so finding games like that like, I wouldn't say like, oh, bringing back a second edition, but finding these like super under the radar games are like really a good way to go about finding games. Yeah, they're like, that's the original edition of QE. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, you look at this, I wouldn't even recognize it as QE, which is funny, but yeah, I love that it's a fancy wood and all that. Yeah, that reminds me of I can't reveal too much info because it's not published yet, and it's gonna be a while before it actually gets released and revealed. But there's a game that we signed recently that it released from I think a European publisher in around the time that COVID hit. And I think that just absolutely killed the momentum for this other game. And where this European publisher doesn't have deep distribution in the US. And so it's a game that if you looked at it on BGG, you would think, oh, it's had its time in the sun, and it didn't gain much traction. But in reality, from talking to the designers, it didn't really reach any retail stores in the US. It had a very limited sales run, and then it just kind of died on the vine very, very prematurely. So that's one that we ended up signing and making some changes to, so it'll be a re-implementation. But yeah, similar story of finding a game that just didn't really have a really widespread release.
One other thing that I would bring up, and this is definitely gonna be quite different depending on who is listening to this, because this is not advice for a small publisher, but this is definitely advice for publishers as they grow, right? And this is something I think Nick, you're doing a really good job at on your side. And Allplay has started to cultivate a lot of this, but finding yourself a stable of designers, right? Finding yourself designers that you want to work with and that are making games for you, right? So for instance, I can talk, we've now done 1, 2, 3 games people know about and 2 other games that people don't know about with Peter Hayward. So we have signed now 5 games from Peter Hayward. Nice. We've done 2 games from Clarence Simpson and plan on doing more, because I think the 2 games that we've done from Clarence have been absolutely amazing. That's Chomp and A Message from the Stars. And he is somebody that like, he's shown me prototypes that he signed with other companies. And I'm like, why didn't you show this to me? I would have loved to have published this game. And then recently, we actually have a few designs coming in from the Adam Hill, Ben Pinchback, and Matt Riddle. So those are another way that we bring games into Allplay. Again, doing a lot of games means that we have a lot of people that we're constantly taking pitches from. But when you have designers that are bringing you games consistently because they like to work with you, and building up what I would call that stable of designers, that's a really good way to consistently make sure that you have product coming down the pipe.
Yeah, not only that, but these designers tend to make games that cater to the same audience. And if that audience, lines up with the publisher's audience, then that's great. You're building an audience of people who like that style of game, and you keep releasing that style of game from the same designers, right? And you mentioned building that stable. Obviously, we do a lot with Rainer Knizia, but another way that we found a designer, and this might be most helpful for designers who are totally unpublished, is another designer we've worked with a couple times and more to come is Robert Hovakimian with Bebop and Shuffle and Swing. We signed his very first published game, even though Moonrollers technically launched, before we launched Bebop and Shuffle and Swing. That was a very quick turnaround on Ivy Studios' part, but we were the first publisher to sign Robert for his first official game, and the reason for that is that Robert started. I got to know Robert because he joined our community on Discord, and he started talking with us, and I got to know him that way. And then he was helping playtest our games from other designers, and so I got to know him on Tabletop Simulator, just playtesting games together and getting his feedback on other designers' games. And then eventually he pitched to me one of his games, and it turned out to be a good fit. So I think that really opened the door. The fact that he got involved and he knew that we published his style of game and his style of design, and so it became a natural kind of easy progression for us to eventually sign his stuff, and we continue to work with him to this day.
Yeah, and I also have worked with Robert. I haven't signed any of his games yet, but he did a massive development project for me, which is on an upcoming game. And I would say he did a fair bit of design work, putting the development process through its paces. The game is really, really good. So Robert's actually somebody that I was introduced to through Nick that was able to work with me for a project as well. So that's definitely a good idea. But what do you say we jump into the meat of this? What you want to talk about taking pitches?
Yeah, you go ahead. You take way more pitches than I do. So
I take on average about 250 pitches a year. It's a lot. And that is an astronomical amount, but Allplay publishes between 15 and 20 games a year. And so I need to at least be looking at that many because, that subtracting what we bring from Tokyo Game Market and from the Japanese market and what we sign from like designers like Reiner Knizia or Peter Hayward that are literally bringing designs to us. And again, I would consider all of those taking pitches as well. But like in general, from just cold pitches, I need to be able to find at least a couple of games in order to fill out that catalog and make sure that I'm looking at enough games that I don't feel like I'm trying to publish not games that at least meet the bar of what Allplay considers a good game, right? So definitely taking a lot of pitches. How many pitches a year do you feel like you take, Nick? If you had to include every type of way that you're looking at games, because I would say that in some ways you playing old Reiner Knizia games to see if they're worth bringing back into the market, because that's something you do quite a bit of. Yeah. If you even considered that type of work a pitch, right? I'm going to play this very unknown Reiner Knizia game from 1994, right? If you considered that a pitch, how many pitches overall do you feel like you take?
Oh man, well I've probably, because Reiner Knizia is such a big part of our brand and target audience, I've probably played almost 200 of his games, including unpublished designs at this point. So we've dug deep into his catalog, and then from face-to-face pitches, it's usually me reaching out to the designer, somebody that I've heard about or that I've played their games. And there's probably only, 1 to 2 dozen of those pitches that I do per year. And then I get a good amount of emails as well. Folks who just email me about their game or with their sell sheet or things like that. So that's probably, I probably get a couple of those a month at least. That I see, and so it's a lot less than what you see per year, but maybe in slightly different ways.
Do you have any memorable pitches that either really phenomenal pitches that you've received, or just absolutely just disastrous pitches that you've taken?
There's one that comes to mind that Kyle and I talk about sometimes. There's a designer, I think he's based out of Australia. I apologize if that's incorrect, but he did a good pitch. He recorded a video to give a very brief summary of the game, and I think he provided maybe a sell sheet as well. But it was very much targeted at us because it was a dental themed game. I think it was area control across the teeth of a mouth, and it involved root canals and cavities and things like that. And it was pretty well researched. There was some very dental themed stuff in the game, and so Kyle and I both got a kick out of it. But when we ultimately sat back and thought about it and talked about it, we're we don't know how appealing this is going to be to a wider audience. It's fun for us, but is this a good fit for the board game community? Are people going to be interested in this style of game? So we ultimately turned it down, but it was okay, you definitely did your homework on us, and that we took a long, good look at that pitch because of that. And so that's one memorable one for me. How about you?
I actually had a very similar thing happen. So we have a line of games at Allplay called the 1 minute to teach line. And this includes the games like Mountain Goats, Dandelions, Chomp, and Lore. And I had a publisher or a designer bring me a game that was literally in an exact sized replica of one of our 1 minute to teach boxes, because Allplay has a very standardized box size, right? Mm-hmm. And all of these games have the exact same artist. And he had gotten his buddy who does art to draw like an anteater in the style of that art style, right? And cool. the style of these games usually have like very swishy lines and, you know, lots of like color involved. And so like it looked like one of our 1 minute to teach games. It literally looked like if I was carrying around a prototype for the next 1 minute to teach game, it would look like this, right? Mm-hmm. And he laid it out, and it had like the size cards that we use for that a lot of the times, and like all of these components. And like he had done his homework and been like, this is your next 1 minute to teach game. And then we played it, and I was like, it's not, but I appreciate the effort.
But you did play it. I mean, he got you to play it, right?
Oh, yeah. 100%. I mean, yeah, that would have been easy work, right? Like, yeah. I was like, done. Yeah. I will say, I can tell a story about the worst pitch I've ever gotten, right? And this is by no means I'm not going to name the designer, but if the designer listens to this, he's going to know who he was. And he's a pretty prolific designer too. He's designed some very popular games, and I like him a lot. So it's not by means of me like trashing him that I'm saying this is the worst pitch that I've ever received, but it really was. Okay. So a lot of times designers, especially like designers that are working designers, will ask me, you know, they'll maybe show me a game and it's not a good fit, and I tell them that, and they're like, well, what are you looking for? And I will generally have a list of games that I am looking for. Like, hey, I'm looking for these styles of games. And one of the games on that list for a very long time has been, I am looking for Kabuto Sumo dice. I want a Kabuto Sumo dice game. Right? It's not something we do a lot of, but I feel like the freneticness of Kabuto Sumo, I feel like would marry itself very well to a dice chucking type of game. Mm-hmm. And I had a brief for it. They'd say, well, what does that look like to you? And I would say, I want you to build me a better strike. Right? Like Kabuto Sumo dice, I feel like the chucking the dice into the arena and like the freneticness of it, I feel like I want you, if someone's going to bring me a Kabuto Sumo dice, they need to bring me a better strike. That's what I'm looking for. That's the design brief. So if you're a designer and you wanted to bring me, so I would tell that to a lot of designers, like, bring me a better strike. I'm looking to do a Kabuto Sumo dice game, right? Well, this designer was like, oh, okay, I can do that. And so they contact me and they're like, Joe, are you going to be at Geekway to the West? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to be there. He's like, good, because I've designed Kabuto Sumo dice and it's going to blow you away. And I was like, oh man, I'm excited because this designer's a good designer. I like their designs, right? And so I'm like, okay, I'm pumped. And so we make some time at Geekway, and he brings me aside and he has the prototype all set up, and he starts like walking me through the game. And like at every instance, I'm like, what he had designed is this like 80-minute midweight Euro dice worker placement game about your Beatles training in the off season.
Whoa.
And I was like, what is this? Like, first of all, we don't publish like 90-minute Euros. Second off, like, this is just like in what world do you see the audience for Kabuto Sumo, right? Which is like this like very brackety style, like pushing insects around on a board and using physics and whatever. In what world do you see that audience going to this game and saying like, oh man, this is exactly what I wanted to follow up with Kabuto Sumo, right? I'm like, this is a terrible Like this is just the worst thing I could ever think of publishing as Kabuto Sumo the dice game. Because if I'm going to call something Kabuto Sumo dice, right? Or I'm going to put the Kabuto Sumo label on something, putting it on like a 90-minute dice worker placement Euro game. And I have to imagine that what had happened is this designer just had a dice worker placement game and he reposted bugs onto it and was like, okay, I'm going to get this design out of my closet and with a publisher. And I was like, no, this is not it. This is not the brief at all. And so again, I've taken more pitches from that designer since. It didn't ruin the relationship. And I like the guy a lot. The thing was, it was not anywhere near what it should have been. And I just thought that was a really funny pitch because like the whole time I'm just sitting there going, this is just so off the mark on every level. I can't even imagine why you thought this would be a good thing to show me. Because I did tell him, build me a better strike. And he's like, oh yeah, it has dice. And that's about where the similarities stopped.
This might be a good transition into another topic we had here as far as what is the best way to pitch a game to you as a publisher. And that just makes me think like, you should know the publisher's target audience. You should know their style of game that they're making. You should know, what is consistent between all of the games that they typically publish. And if what you're trying to pitch to them is just way off base, then it's just, you're kind of wasting each other's time. You might have a really great game that you're pitching, but it sounds like it's probably not a great game for this publisher if it just doesn't fit anything that they've published before, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a funny story.
So what do you think? What is the best way to pitch a game to Nick?
Ooh, I like succinct information. Like a sell sheet is great. I think some folks who pitch to us just have no clue how pitching goes. I often get the email from somebody who's very unfamiliar with the industry, and they're like, "Hey, I've got this idea. I think it's going to be amazing," and they're like, "I think you should." I think you should really get in on this with us because it's going to make a lot of money. And like they kind of like sell it as like, oh, you need to invest in this and it's the next big monopoly or whatever. But then they give very little info about the game. They don't give me a sell sheet or anything. And that's when I immediately know like, okay, they don't really know what they're getting into with this industry. Whereas if somebody sends me a nice succinct sell sheet, I know, okay, they've been around the block. They kind of know what they're doing in this industry, and it's easier for me to get the information I need from the sell sheet itself. And I know you have opinions on the best kind of sell sheet to receive and what kind of information you want from it, because I've seen you comment on this on Facebook before. So what do you want to see in a or what is a sell sheet, and what do you want to see in that from a designer?
So what's the best way to pitch a game to me? If you don't have a sell sheet, do not approach me. Like, don't do it. Don't do it. If we're at a convention and you walk up to me and you want me to look at your game and you don't have a sell sheet in your hand, like it's a non-starter for me. And I think there are a lot of designers out there that like push back on this like attitude from publishers, right? This idea of, hey, like that's not cool because then you're putting this like graphic design barrier in front of designers being able to make games. And I'm telling you, like I've signed games that have had terrible sell sheets, but I want a sell sheet because it's going to, first of all, putting information in my hand so that I can remember it later is really important, right? Like, and that's a lot more valuable than me just taking your prototype and being like, I'll put it on the pile of 100 to be played. They're sitting over there. I have like 100 to be played prototypes over there, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'll take it back with me if that's what you really want, but I can't promise you I'm going to get to it anytime in the next 6 months, right? Mm. And so like giving me a sell sheet is one way that I'm going to get home and be able to remember what your game was even after the pitch, right? And so the things that I want to see on it are player count, player time, a general idea of components, a general idea of game length, and literally give me the 1, 2, 3 of like what makes your game interesting, right? Like just tell me why your game is special. That's what a sell sheet should be, right? And honestly, it could be like people say like, oh, you're putting a graphic design barrier. And I know some people go all out on their sell sheets, right? But like honestly, just a picture of your game and just like a title and some basic information is all it needs to be. I don't care about anything else, right? I just want that basic information, because for Allplay specifically, the reason I want a sell sheet is I am able to say no very easily, and that means I'm not going to waste your time and you're not going to waste my time, right? So a lot of times somebody will hand me a sell sheet and I'll look at it and it will say 90 minutes. And I'll say, I'm sorry, this is not the right kind of game for us, right? Or they'll hand me a game and it'll say like 600 cards. And I'll be like, I'm sorry, not the right kind of game for us, right? Because I just, there are certain things about Allplay games that like designers don't know this, but I know this, right? Like I'm likely never going to publish a game that just has like text on every card. Right. For instance, right. Let me just, for instance, this, right. There's a game that came out and it's a very good game. It's called Veil for Eternity. That could fit in an Allplay box. It could fit on an Allplay rule sheet. But one of the things I don't like is when every card in the game has different abilities and different special powers. That's just not the kind of game that like fits the Allplay branding or the Allplay aesthetic. And I'm not saying that I would never be willing to like make a choice to do something like that, but a game like Seasons, right, that came out from I always forget the name of that publisher, but Seasons, that's a game like that super combo-y, conflict-driven type of stuff, or Radlands where it's literally head-to-head attacking kind of card games. I'm like, it's not the Allplay brand. It's not the Allplay aesthetic. It's not what we do, right? And there's just a lot of games like that people will pitch to me or show me, and the sell sheet will just tell me, like, I'm sorry. If I see a giant board with all these pieces all over it and, like, all these tracks that people are moving up, I'm like, this is not an Allplay game. I don't care if you say it's 45 minutes. I'm like, this is literally not what Allplay does. We don't make this style of game. It's not for our audience, right? Or if it's just like one of those like party games where it's like very like, oh, everybody chooses a thing and argues about what would win in a fight, a piece of pumpkin pie or a snow cone, right? And I'm like, it's just not the kind of game that Allplay does, you know? And I'm not saying that your game is bad. It's just not right for me. And the sell sheet helps me cut through that very quickly and get to whether or not going further is worth either of our time. So that's my one thing, is I demand a sell sheet. People ask me all the time, can I pitch to you at a convention? The answer is always going to be, I make time to look at prototypes at conventions, but before I give you a slot, I want a sell sheet, because I'm not going to sit down and listen to your pitch about your 3-hour Civilization game. And again, I'm not trying to be mean to designers. I'm just saying, I think a sell sheet is a very valuable tool for designers to use.
Yeah, I agree. It's the first thing a publisher's thinking when they get a pitch is like, is this something we could even publish? Does this even fit our product line, right? And so sell sheet really helps to answer that question. And then if I'm interested after seeing the sell sheet or the basic info, and it seems like, okay, maybe we could publish this, assuming we like it and all that, then I generally like to see if it's an email or somebody reaching out to me over the internet. I find it helpful if the designer records like a very brief summary video, maybe like 2 to 5 minutes, where they just quickly go over like, here's what the game looks like, here's kind of how it plays, and give me like the quick 5-minute pitch over YouTube or wherever they upload the video to, right? Because then I don't have to read through. Sometimes they send me a whole rule book, and it's like, I don't want to spend the time reading this whole rule book, you know?
Yeah.
Like I've got other things to do with my time. But if it's like a 2 to 5 minute video pitch from them where they're just briefly explaining things and explaining what's interesting about the game and how does it stand out, and like maybe give me a little sample of how it plays, or at least the core parts of it, I find that helpful as like a next step beyond the sell sheet of can we publish this, right?
There's 2 questions I ask every time I actually sit down and take a pitch. There are always going to be 2 questions that I ask the designer, right? The first question I always ask the designer is, when people playtest this, what do they find to be the most interesting or most exciting part of the game, right? Like when you playtest, what are people drawn to? right? And I want them to be able to answer that for me. The second thing that I want, that I always ask is I say, what other games inspired you to design this? And I am going to tell you right now, the wrong answer is, oh, this is a brand new concept that no one has ever. Stop. like full stop. I'm not like bad answer right away. I'm like, I want you to tell me, be like, oh, me and my game group really loved Cascadia, but I thought like it would be more interesting to take, a design in this way. And so we developed out this thing. And I'm not trying to say like, oh, I want to publish a better Cascadia or a different Cascadia. I'm just saying like, I want to know what types of games inspired you to make this design. And if you tell me like, oh no, it's complete, like, I just like, I just like automatically like, really? Like, are you like, I feel like there's almost like an ego there where it's like, no, this is nothing anyone has ever thought of. I'm like, I feel like that's a good question. And a good thing a publisher should know is like, what kind of audience is this going to cater to? Like, oh, is this like an Agricola, right? Or is this like a this, right? Like if someone told me, oh, I was inspired by Captain Sonar, I'm like, ooh, okay, that's a weird, cool little game with like the different teams working on submarines. Like that alone is going to get my interest peaked, right? When you tell me what inspired it and I'm like, ooh, that's a really cool game. I like that game. That's a really good way to draw me in as a publisher, as opposed to trying to tell me something that you invented something brand new that no one has ever seen before in the history of board gaming, right? I'm like, don't lead in like that, right? Like just be like, I wanted to design kind of a mashup of this type of game and this type of game, right? Like great, awesome, helps me a lot, right? Good information to give a publisher.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a fear that like if I mention this other well-known game, then the publisher's going to look at my game as like a worse version or a knockoff, right? Or things like that. And that may be why they come to you and say, "Oh, nothing inspired this game."
I guess I should maybe. I think I'm gonna like let a little publisher secret through. Like I'm gonna let all the designers that might be listening in like peek behind the curtain into the secret world of like board game publishing and how we make decisions and stuff like that. A lot of designers I've seen like kind of get bent out of shape, and me and some other publishers were having this conversation, right? And there's like this like easy letdown that we really want to give designers when we're like, we don't want to publish their game, right? Then sometimes there's this easy letdown, and sometimes we say stuff that isn't true. And I've honestly quit doing that, but I think a lot of publishers are guilty of this, and I have been guilty of this in the past, right? But I think a lot of publishers want to give designers like an easy letdown. And so they'll say something like, oh, this game reminds me way too much of Wingspan, so unfortunately, it's just not a good time for us to bring this into the market, right? And then the designer's left thinking like, why wouldn't you want to publish a game like Wingspan? That seems stupid, because that's like the best-selling game of all time for the last couple of decades, right? Yeah. And then like the second thing is they're like, my game's also nothing like Wingspan. Like it doesn't have birds in it. Like we kind of have like a tableau, but like a million games have tableaus. Like what are you talking about? It's like Wingspan, right? And the designer's like, that doesn't make any sense. A lot of times what that translates into is, I just don't like your game very much and I don't want to make it. And like a lot of times publishers like don't feel good about giving that type of feedback, right? And I think designers more than often appreciate like if they're like, hey, this isn't a good fit. And that's basically been where I've gotten to is like, I just tell people, I'm like, hey, this isn't a good fit for Allplay. Like, sorry about that. Like, and sometimes I'll give them reasons if I feel like I played the game and play tested it and was like, there's some real critiques I have about the game, right? And I'll maybe give that to them so that they can feel good. I just played a trick-taking game the other day at one of our prototype nights, and I emailed the designer. I'm like, hey, I'm sorry I've had your game for so many months. I finally got it to the table. It's not a good fit for Allplay. It's honestly just a little too lucky. I feel like you can make high pairs or low pairs way too easy because you can always just rearrange your cards because you were playing them in sets of 2. And I was like, it's just, I didn't feel compelled. I just felt like I could kind of play whatever I wanted. If I needed to play something low, I could. If I needed to play something high, I could. And so I told him, I was like, a lot of times it just always came down to the last person to play, mixing their cards in the way that would either win or lose the trick depending on what they wanted. And they always controlled it. And I was like, I just took away the fun of what I enjoy in a trick-taking game. So I gave him some real criticism criticism on the game and some feedback to hopefully make the game better, right? But like sometimes I'll do that, but like I will always just say this is not a good fit for all play. Right. And that's usually my letdown. But I think a lot of publishers like give feedback that's more like, oh, I'm sorry. There's a game that came out that's very similar to this, and we don't really want to like jump into the market. A lot of times that's just code for we don't want to publish your game, and I don't know how to tell you that directly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. So I guess when you know you want to publish a game, like how does that light bulb moment work for you? Like, how do you usually discover like, oh, this is an all play game, we're ready to sign this, and what gets you to that point?
So, okay, the bar is incredibly high for prototypes for me. Like I have to be able to play your prototype and be so engaged with it with no art, no fancy components, no anything that I'm like, this is really special. Like this is really special. Or at least very interesting. Like, ooh, I'm really engaged. So if your prototype can't do that, it's not going to make it further down the road. Like I think there's maybe some publishers that make a living out of like signing mediocre games and polishing them to the best version of what they can be. Mm-hmm. I don't like doing that. I like finding games that I find engaging from the first time I sit down and play them, or at least feel like there is a special spark of something in this game, right? That's like step one. So like the prototype has to do that. Your design has to do the heavy lifting at the beginning, right? With no art, no fancy components, no nothing. Right. There was a game I played at Unpub this year that we actually ended up signing, but I was so enamored with it. I didn't think it was going to be a good fit for all play. So I actually called Nick and was like, Nick, this game, it's amazing. Are you interested in doing a game like this? Right. I guess I'll spoil a little bit of it, but it's like, do you want to do a solo game? Because I found this solo game and it's freaking amazing, Nick. It's amazing. And in fact, I was so passionate about it that Nick had the designer send him a prototype.
Yeah, it shows up at my doorstep.
And like 3 days, like after I had that call with Nick, I like called Nick. I'm like, hey, Nick, have you done anything with that game yet? He's like, no, I haven't. I was like, okay, because I want it. Like, because at the time I was like, oh, we're not going to do a solo game. It's not really our thing. And then I was like, no, I really want to do this solo game. I really want to. And I think like Nick has, I've kept Nick involved in like the process as I've like developed the theming and the art and everything like that. But like when a prototype does that and it just sticks right here in this brain, I'm like, this is really cool. This is really interesting. I'm really engaged. That's like step one. Right. That's like step one. And then Nick, I'll let you talk for a minute because I feel like I've been talking for a while. And then maybe I'll come back and give step two.
Yeah, no, I'm in a similar space where, you know, I did all this school to become a dentist, right? And I'm past all the hard stuff of you know, student loans and homework and tests and exams and all of that. And now it's like much easier for me, and I hope this is obvious, like it's easier for me to make money doing fillings or whatever than it is publishing a game at this point. So what motivates me to sign a game or publish it? For me, and I think this is true for a lot of publishers, but it depends on their business model and how they got into the industry. But for me, if I find a game that I love, then and it's not published, or I feel like I can do it justice publishing it, then I become very selfish. It's like I don't want anyone else to publish this game. I want to publish this game the way that I envision it, the way that I see the artwork and the theme and the components playing out, and like these aspects of the game really stand out to me. This is why I'm in love with the game, and then that's easy for me to communicate to our customers and to our backers, like, hey, this is what I love about the game, and this is probably what you'll love about the game. So just like you, like the first requirement is that I need to love playing the game personally. So it needs to fit my tastes, right? If it's a non-interactive game, if it's overly complex, then right away, that's rarely the type of game that I enjoy playing, so I'm out. You know, but if it's interactive, if it's clean, if it's elegant, and then if it has a unique or interesting twist to it that satisfies a need that maybe no other game quite satisfies, then it's something I really want to publish. And that's usually how we end up signing a game. If the game is streamlined, that helps a lot. But I feel like if a designer starts with a concept that is marketable from the get-go, then that makes it so much easier for me to market. Sometimes I end up playing a game that is like, I really enjoy playing this game, but I don't know how to market it. I don't know how to get people. Basically, what I usually tell the designers, I don't know how to get people excited about this game. Even though I like playing it, and once people are playing it, they enjoy it. It's like, how do I get people excited enough to buy this game or to even try it?
Okay, so I have actually kind of a funny story about that in general. So I signed, and honestly, I think one of our better games that we've ever done as Allplay. We signed in one of my personal favorite Allplay games. I signed A Message from the Stars, right? And you've played this game, right, Nick? Yeah. And I think it's such a clever, interesting idea. But I signed this game, and I was like, oh, it's such a really clever, heavy logic and deduction puzzle game. And I signed it. And I handed it off to my developers, right? So me and the designer actually did like a little bit of work at Unpub where I found the game, and basically we made the contract for it, and then I sent it off to my developers. My developers got around to doing the initial development, and they came back to me and they said, Joe, our professional opinion is you should not make this game. We think it's bad. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's great. I'm like, I've personally played the game like 20 times, and I know that it is a love it or hate it game, but I have found lots of people like me that really love it. And they're like, Joe, like nobody, we've played this now like 4 times. Everyone hates it. Everyone hates it. And I'm like, and I remember I was like digging into it. I was like, okay, what's your pitch? Right? What's your pitch for this game? And they're like, well, we've been going to these like designer pub meetups, and we've been trying to get people to play it by being like, oh, do you like code names? I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is not like, if you tell someone this game's like code names and then you sit down and play A Message from the Stars, you can be like, okay, there's like one person on one side of a screen kind of, so that maybe makes sense. But I was like, this is not like code names, right? This is way more complicated, way more mathy. I was like, your pitch is wrong. I was like, first of all, this is not a noisy bar game. You should not be playing this at a pub at all, right? You should be playing this in a more quiet area where people can think and get inside their own heads. And second of all, you need to be a little bit upfront about how deep of a game this is, right? And so that was like really the impetus of like, once they changed that, they came back to me a couple weeks later, they're like, okay, we've play tested a couple more times. We can say there are people that hate this game, but we have found people that do like it. And I will say, based on the success we've had with it, I'm surprised how many people have enjoyed it as much as they do. But I will say, like, that was kind of a funny anecdote of like you said, like finding that like special thing about a game, but like it doesn't always like connect. One of the big things with me is, like you said, like having that vision, right? If you have a prototype and you see that final product and you can imagine the artist that you want to work with and you can imagine the theme that you want to apply to it, that's a really nice thing to be able to do. How often do you keep the theme of the game that you signed versus change the theme of the game that you signed?
Ooh, it's pretty rare. I'd say it's like less than 30% of the time, maybe 20% of the time or less, where we end up keeping the exact same theme that was originally pitched to us. Usually the theme makes sense for the mechanisms, right? But if I spend some time thinking about it and brainstorming other ideas, I can often come up with another theme that fits it just as well as far as mechanism fit goes, but is maybe more appealing, or maybe I can see in my mind a better art style or a more appealing art style for the game within that new theme. And so it's pretty frequent that we end up changing the theme at least a bit, but often quite drastically.
I'm going through and trying to count the number of games that we have kept the theme for. I am currently at 6 games that we have actually kept the theme for. 7. I mean, if I honestly threw out like reprints, like obviously I'm not going to change the theme of Through the Desert, right? Like I'm not going to be like it was Through the Desert, now it's about moles, right? Like I'm not going to do that, right? But I would say if I don't count like bringing second editions into the conversation, I bet I can count the number of games that we've kept the theme of on one hand. That's one thing.
That sounds like a lot, but Allplay has done way more games than one hand's worth, right? Like how many games are you guys at now?
Oh, so many. Yeah. Like I barely ever keep the theme of whatever the game is pitched as. Yep. Like and again, sometimes the theme, it's tweaked, not completely like we throw it out and there's a brand new one, right? But like as far as like these games go, like there's a lot of games that we do not keep the theme for, and for good reason, right? Like publishers kind of know what sells, right? Like that's kind of our position in this, is like we know how to make product and we know how to sell board games. Well, hopefully we do, right? And so that's kind of like when people think, what does the publisher bring to the table? Like we know how to make products, right? You've designed a good game, but being able to turn it into a marketable, successful product in this industry is a tall order, right? And a lot of people say, oh, I ran a successful Kickstarter and got 3,000 backers. Like that is just the baby tip of the iceberg in terms of being a successful game in this market, and looking at like what the possible depth of a game's potential is and giving that game every chance to get as far as it can down that path, right? And that's the difficult thing, is a lot of times, theming just changes. It needs to make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also gives the publisher a way to, hopefully the designer's on board with the new theme, but it helps the publisher to become more invested creatively in the game itself, and if they're invested in it creatively, then they're more passionate about it, right? And I think it shows. When you and I fall in love with how a game's going to look and the theme of it, then we can bring that out so much better in the rule book, in the marketing, in the artwork, how we direct the artist to make the game, right? Whereas if it's not something we're passionate about from a theme standpoint, then that could end up showing through in how the artwork's done, right? We don't care as much what it looks like and that kind of thing. So I think it's to the benefit of both the designer and the publisher if they're both in love with the theme and the direction it's taken. So.
Well, let me ask you, should we go ahead and get into the kind of final chapter of the episode and do another top 5 list?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to be sharing our top 5 games we wish we had signed or published, right?
I think this is a really fun thing. So this was kind of a weird one to be like how do we make like I'm not promising every episode is going to have a top 5, but how do we have like a top 5 out of like talking about games that have been designed, like top 5 pitches we've taken, or top 5 right, like top 5 pitches we've taken, not great, right? That's not going to be a really great top 5. But this is why I came up with this concept. Top 5 games we wish we would have published, right? So me and Nick are both publishers, and we see a lot of games come out into the market every year. And it's sometimes easy to look at like just really successful games and go, oh, I'm jealous. I wish I would have published that. But every once in a while, you're just like, see a game and you're like, I really wish that was in my catalog. Yeah. And it's not always because of the sales, and it's not always because of like, but just like there's certain things about the game that you're just like, I really wish we were doing that game. Maybe it's a little bit of jealousy. But the reason I came up with this top 5 is because I had a pitch meeting with Peter Hayward. And it was a really not great first pitch meeting because he showed me a bunch of really heavy euros and they were terrible for me. But he basically stopped showing me games and was like, can I just ask you some questions? And I remember one of the games he asked me is he said, if you could have signed any 2 games, what 2 games would you have signed? And 2 of those are going to appear on this list. So... Nice. But that really made me change my thought process as a publisher to go, what type of games do I really value or really find a lot of value in, where I look at a game and go, man, I really wish that was an Allplay game. And so I thought this was a fun exercise for me and Nick to look at games that have come out in the industry and go, I wish I had published this. And again, we're not allowed to choose any games that are on either from the Bitewing catalog or the Allplay catalog. So
Yeah.
Nick's not allowed to say he wish he published Through the Desert.
I would take that happily, but that's fine. No, I think yeah, let's jump into this. I've got one ready to rumble here. So this is an oldie for Kyle and I because we both wish we had published this.
I want to ask you real quick before we get into this. Do you think there's any overlap?
I do actually. I think there's at least one game. There's one that I put on my list, and I was like, "Oh, Joe might actually put this one just based on our conversation." So we'll see. So yeah, my first game is Ethnos, and it's one that Kyle and I desperately wish we could have done. You know, we weren't around when it was originally published, but we did try to get Paolo to give us the rights for a second edition. I actually wonder if the rights ever left CMON because they just put out a second edition of Ethnos, just barely. But this is one that has been very popular over the years, and it plays in about an hour. It's an area control game that plays great up to 6 players, and it's very approachable. I feel it's one where you're playing out. It's kind of like Ticket to Ride. You're collecting cards in your hand. You're trying to collect a set of them, and then you play out a whole set or band of cards that are the same color or the same like mythological fantasy race, right? Like the dwarves or the wizards or whatever. And then that lets you trigger an ability, but also add a token to an area. So this is a game that has had a lot of fans over the years and really great reviews actually, but the production is so interesting. Like it has that John Howe classic art, which is so prolific now that some people accuse it of being generic. And then on top of that, they used a map, I think of Slovakia for the game board, and like the way the graphic design and the great artwork and then just like this really dated graphic design merged together. A lot of people don't like the look of this game. This is one that I would have happily republished as a new edition. We might have slightly rethemed it to like, you know, keep the different races, but maybe lean into more like the Yeti race and like maybe more mythological than just like generic fantasy. But yeah, this is a game that I really love to play and always hits the spot for me. I think the new editions, it's had an interesting, you know, history since then where the designer Paolo Mori and Space Cowboys took it in a different direction where they replaced the area control with tracks into Archeo Society. And some people love that new version, but other people hate it because they threw out their favorite part, the area control, right? And now CMON has done a new version with anthropomorphic animals, and they've made a lot of changes. And I think some people are like, oh, this is so much better than the original version, and other people are like, oh, I prefer the original version. So it's been interesting to see how that's played out, but I do wish I could have taken a crack at this.
In board gaming, you're always going to have the haters that are like, the ugliest version of this game was the best version of this game, right? And I'm just like, yeah. I can't even with these people like anymore. I'm like, hey, I appreciate you having your opinion, and that copy exists, and you can own it, but like. Quit getting mad at us for selling games. Like anthropomorphic animals do really well in the market. That's the reason publishers use them, right? And I understand there's always going to be 20 people that are very angry because anthropomorphic animals. But honestly, number one, it's hard to draw humans. Number two, anthropomorphic animals sell. So what do you want us to do, right? Anyways, I feel like I should start with the one that's the possible overlap. And I don't know if this is it, but I'm going to start with that one so I can claim it first. And I do like the idea of like what you did and talk about like what you might have done differently, even though I think a lot of these games are specifically like already very good, right? Yeah. Otherwise we wouldn't be picking them. Mm-hmm. So my the first one I want to talk about is Nidavellir.
Ooh, okay.
Nidavellir is, first of all, an incredible game. So it's an auction game, and I love auction games in which you're doing 3 simultaneous auctions on different things, on different dwarves at taverns that you're recruiting to score the most points. It's pretty abstract, right? But one of the most interesting things is like the 2 tokens that you don't use to bid. So you have 5 tokens. You actually get to combine those numbers together to get a higher point value token. So if you go for like using bigger numbers for your bids, you're probably going to get the dwarves that you want more. But if you go for the lower dwarves at the beginning, you might be able to get higher currencies later. And there's special ability dwarves when you cross certain thresholds for having the most of certain types. All the different dwarf types have different types of scoring. Some score in like the more you have, the higher the rank's going to go. Some are multipliers of each other. And so they all have different abilities. And I think that this theme is already very good. I think the theme of like recruiting these dwarves to your, thing and the tokens and the gold and everything, it's fine. I don't mind it. I personally would have wanted a more charming Kyle Farron style artwork attached to this, right? And I'm not saying Kyle Farron specifically, but like more of that vibe where it's like a little bit more whimsical and a little bit more silly. I feel like the tone of this game, especially the box cover, is just so stark for such a light, fast-paced game that has a lot of like outbidding each other. I feel like they try to make the game feel very epic in scope, and at the end you're just collecting some dwarves. So that's really my take on Nidavellir. I'm not trying to say the publisher did a bad job. I'm just saying I would have done something different with it, but I do find that the gameplay is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I really love the core auctioning concept of bidding with 3 coins, but then combining the other 2 to upgrade into a better coin. Like, I think that's really the hook of this game that really made it catch fire. And I've enjoyed playing this game, but I found each time I teach it is just so exhausting because, especially if you have the expansion, which is kind of what killed it for me, is there's so many different cards and different symbols that just going through all of those and trying to teach those enough so that everybody understands what they all mean, like, was exhausting. So I almost wish that the bidding system was tied to a much easier to teach game as far as what you're earning from the cards and stuff. But yeah, this is a interesting pick, a great pick, because the auctioning system is just so unique, and I'd love to see it done in other games as well. Okay, my second game, I got to pull up the list again. Oh, here we go. We're into my first Knizia, Mlem Space Agency. So I love push your luck games, and I love a social, interactive dice chucker where people can banter and rag on each other and things like that. And I feel like Mlem just hits the sweet spot from all directions for me. This is a game that is fairly new, done by publisher Rebel Studio, and I think the biggest credit to them is that they did this nice neoprene matte style production, and the game is like $30. I don't know how they did that. That's some kind of wizardry there, where they got the cost down to so cheap and accessible, and yet it's a very nice production. But this is a game that I love to play. This is, for me, a very unique one from Reiner. I've played a ton of his push your luck dice games, and this is like by far my favorite. So this one I would have loved to have published personally, but I'm happy to be a fan of it as well. If I had done it, I don't know if I'm a huge fan of the cat astronaut vibes. I do like the planets where there's like a yarn planet and a fishbowl planet and like some little Easter eggs there that are cat themed. But I probably would have gone with just like a more silly, cartoonish, like human astronaut theme if it were me. But aside from that, like it's hard to complain about this game at all because it's so perfect for me in a lot of ways. So Mlem is my next pick.
Well, then I will choose a game in which I will change nothing because I think it's perfect as is. A game I wish was in the Allplay catalog and that I had published, and I would have done nothing to it, is Micro Macro Crime City. I wish I took pitches where games were as interesting as this. If somebody came into a pitch with me and pulled out this Where's Waldo style drawing and we're like, all right, so we're solving crime. I'm like, say no more.
Contract.
Say no more. Like, sold, done. It is a done deal. Like, let's do this. How big of a royalty do you want? Like, sky's the limit. But like instead it's like, oh, it's a polyomino game about squirrels, or like, oh, it's a tile laying game where we're building a park, and I'm like, okay, right? But like, oh my goodness, the amazingness that is Micro Macro Crime City. I love this game. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's unique. I think it's original, and I think it stands alone in the market as something that will always be very hard to replicate and will be evergreen forever, because I do not see a world in which somebody will not be able to discover and love this game. I think Micro Macro is such a phenomenal product, such an amazing game, and I really wish we were the ones that would have published it. No shade to the people that did publish it, but I do just absolutely love this game.
It's so good. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of this one as well. I have fond memories of, we would hang this on our wall, my wife and I, and we would just have like almost like date nights where we would be solving cases and such. And it's so easily expandable, right? Like it's just the perfect product in so many ways. So great choice, Micro Macro. My next one is another, this one is very recent, very new, Wilmot's Warehouse. As soon as I saw the pitch and the concept of this game, I was like, dang, I wish I had signed this. This is so cool, because it kind of is similar to...
You wish you published this?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is... I love this game, too. This is so outside of Bitewing's wheelhouse.
Yeah, but that's I don't know. It's just, it's so unique and refreshing in so many ways that it's like... This actually drove me to like start looking for memory-based games. After seeing Trio and Nana and like really loving that game and seeing how popular that was, and then That's Not a Hat, and then this one, I'm like, shoot, I got to get on this memory game trend, because it's been such a taboo mechanism for so long, and understandably so. Like people don't want to showcase how bad their memory is when they're playing a game, right? And especially if it's just like a very ancillary part of the game. But what these games in Wilmot's Warehouse have done is they have made like forgetting things the point of the game. And they've made it like fun and funny and interesting. So Wilmot's Warehouse is just a cooperative-based storytelling memory game where you put down one tile face down at a time, and everybody looks at it, and you decide where to put it, but you got to come up with some kind of story or narrative to remind you of what's going on as you build things out. And like, it's just the memorable stories that come out of it, and the people that I've played it with, it's just been a hit every time. So this is the type of game that, yeah, it's way outside of our wheelhouse, but I would publish it in a heartbeat if we had been given a chance. So
nice. Wow, what a pick. I definitely tried to stick with games that I felt like made good Allplay games as well. But man, this like hit me from the just blindsided. I was like, wow, okay. Actually, I have one on here that people might argue that for us, but I have good reasoning why it should be our game. Okay, I'm going to pick another really safe bet because it's a game that I love. Galaxy Trucker. I wish that Allplay, and again, what universe would that have ever happened, right? Like Vlada Chvátil designed it, right? Like he's not going to be like, this isn't a good fit for CGE. No, but I really wish I had published Galaxy Trucker. Again, stands alone in what it does, right? Like there has not been a game that has come out since Galaxy Trucker that I feel strongly that it would have been good. Right? Or that even touches close to what Galaxy Trucker does. There is this like first part of the game that is this frenetic grabbing pieces, building your spaceship, doing this really cool thing. And then there's this second part of the game, which is equally as fun to me, where you basically race your thrown together things, and you get like 2 cards into the race, and basically you're like, oh, I forgot to have shields, or I only connected all of my engines are on this one part of the ship that's connected by this one little link at the beginning of my spaceship, and nothing else is connected anywhere. So that one piece gets hit by an asteroid and your whole ship gets destroyed. And it's so much chaotic frenetic fun on both ends that it just marries into what I would consider nearly a perfect product. So I think Galaxy Trucker is a near perfect game in achieving what it does, and I will forever be jealous that this does not exist within the Allplay catalog.
That's a great pick. Yeah, Galaxy Trucker is in a league of its own. I love you just frantically, chaotically throwing something together and then just taking the roller coaster of watching it fall apart or miraculously survive. So, good pick. My next pick is another. Am I on to the next Kinesia here? I am on to the next Kinesia. Orango. This is one that I had developed a whole analysis and pitch for Kinesia Games, and I did pitch it to them. But unfortunately, at the same time, a much bigger publisher was also interested in it, so obviously we didnnt get it. CMON just put out the new version in Yakuza, but my pitch for Orango, I love this game, okay? The reason I love it is not just that it's Kinesia, like there are plenty of Kinesia games I don't ever want to publish. But he's taking his two greatest strengths and combining them into one game. He's taking his strength of auction games like Raw and High Society and so on, and combining that with tile placement of like Through the Desert and Tigris and Euphrates into one game. And it's mind-blowing to me that this wasn't as popular as it was when it initially released in 2014 as Orango. And part of the problem was that the production, and you can see here, people replaced the seashells, which rolled around and annoyed people. They replaced it in this version with beads. But there were parts of the production that annoyed folks. Also, the tiles looked very similar to the game board, and it's very important. The tiles come out a few at a time, and it's very important to be able to read the board and see which tiles are available and on the board at any given time. And like you look at this, and it almost looks like the exact same graphic design on here, so it's hard to tell when a tile is on the board and when it's just a printed space. So there were production problems there. But I went to Reiner and I pitched this as Orango Second Edition by Vincent Dutrait with slightly nicer components and such, and a second map, and it plays up to 5 players. I had all these ideas for him to develop for this game with us, and he ended up giving the game to CMON, and in their defense, they are selling it now for it's going to release actually more widespread next year. It did sell at CMON Expo already, but in their defense, they are selling the game for $35, which my idea was going to be definitely more expensive than that. So they are offering it at a cheaper price point with the nice Yakuza, cat Japanese Yakuza artwork, and as you can see, they definitely fixed one of the issues with the tile readability on the board. So this is still one that I wish I could have done in the way that I had envisioned it and kind of really planned out. But credit to CMON for bringing it to life again, because I think it's a great game.
That's a good pick. I picked up a copy. I'm really excited to play this because I know you've been telling me for a very long time that this is like very high on your list.
Yeah.
So have we had any overlap so far?
No, not yet.
Okay. This is my heart, Nick. I want nothing more than to publish For Sale.
Ah, For Sale. Yep.
It is a perfect card game. 0 changes. In fact, Eagle Griffin released a version not that long ago called For Sale Autorama. Worst game. Just fundamentally not good. Basically added a third, like For Sale is perfect, and For Sale should always be in print, right? This version added like a third round of bidding that you did before. It's not great. Don't get this. I think you can still play base For Sale with that, but
you can.
Base For Sale, that's what you want. Oh my goodness, what like a perfect game. I do find the original artwork to be slightly charming, but at the same time, I feel like it does need an update for a new audience and a new world in which we live in. I think I do like the real estate theme. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But I do want to I just want to get my hands on this one. I want to dig into it. I want to find out what kind of like things can happen, and I would do a lot to get for sale. I would give away Nick's firstborn child. I like my firstborn child, but I would give away Nick's firstborn child if I could get for sale.
That's very kind of you, Joe. Yeah. No, I love this game too, and I agree. I think the artwork could use an update, but I mean, I love the theme and the charm of like, you know, the worst house is like the outhouse and the cardboard box, and the best house is like a space station, and then every what's cool is every card has like a little pet or an animal on it somewhere on the card, which I think is a fun little Easter egg too to find in the artwork. But yeah, what a great auction game of assembling your hand in round one, bidding with coins, and then bidding with the hand you've assembled in round two by selling off your houses. Yeah, this has always been a classic for me. I'm a big fan of For Sale. So I think we're on to the last picks here. Number 5, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had 2 picks just in case you stole the first one, but you did not. So, and I can see how, you know, maybe in its current implementation, it's not necessarily an all-play game. Maybe it could be, but Quest for El Dorado is my last pick. And the reason I picked this is for the last like couple years, probably, I've been harassing Knizia Games, Britta being the key person of my harassment, but also Reiner when I can get in contact with him directly. He often works through his assistants when working with publishers. But Quest for El Dorado is the game that like really put Knizia back on the map for hobbyist gamers. He was designing great games like Orango and stuff when people weren't paying as much attention to him. But Quest for El Dorado just like really hit the sweet spot for the hobby and took off and has been an evergreen game since its release in 2017. But I love how Reiner looked at basically a very popular trend in the hobby at the time, which was started by Dominion, namely deck building. And he said, how can we make this more approachable? And so in his mind, the way that played out was by combining it with a game board where the cards you play are the spaces you move into. You need a machete to move through the jungle. You need a paddle to move through the water, and so on. And for him, that's what made the mechanism of deck building more intuitive, and it ended up being just the perfect blend of racing and deck building. That's become one of my favorite games personally. But I would love, you know, I feel bad for the fans, especially in the U.S. of Quest for El Dorado, who have a hard time getting a copy of this game with all of its expansions, because this game has been split up into so many different versions from different publishers. There's 2 different art versions, and now there's new expansions coming out in the new art version from Vincent Dutrait that's like, in the US, Ravensburger, they haven't kept up with the new artwork and the new expansions. And so now there's all these people who want to get this game and want to get all the expansions. And if you're in the wrong country, it's harder to acquire. So I've gone to Reiner repeatedly and told him like, hey, just make me a spin-off version of this game and I will publish it and satisfy that need that other designer or other gamers and fans have. Or like, you know, the original game I would have loved to have published as well, because I think it's just a fantastic family weight deck builder. So that's my last pick, Quest for El Dorado.
Yeah, if there was one Knizia that would be on my list, it would definitely be this one. I think this is one of my favorite Reiner Knizia games. I mean, maybe Raw ranks slightly higher. Like if I wish I would have published a Reiner Knizia game, like Raw's up there because Raw's amazing. Yeah. But this one's also extremely high. But yeah, this is one that we actually don't have overlap on. Because my 5th pick is a game that I am in love with, and this is the one that people are going to be like, what is Joe talking about? Like, not an all-play game. I disagree, and I disagree hard. Container.
Yes.
Nick, have you ever played Container?
No, because I've wanted to acquire, you know, this 10th anniversary edition, but it's just so big and the aftermarket, you know, price is so expensive that I've never gotten to play it, even though it's gotten like a great shut up and sit down review, and it's a very appealing game. Like, yeah, if you want to buy this right now, go ahead, go to eBay and pay $325. Like, yeah, no thanks. I'll buy some other games that are much cheaper.
So Container has a very weird history. It originally was published by Valley Games a very long time ago. I believe in like the very early 2000s, if not the 1990s. It was in that time frame, right? Back in like just like the the time of before board games, right? And it was produced in such a weird way. And it actually has this like really funny thing where they wanted to make the ships out of resin, but the day the shipment for what the ships were supposed to be made out of came in, the supplier misunderstood, and all of the original boats, and in fact, if you can find pictures of the original boats, Nick, from the original version of Container, they were all made out of dental resin, right? So Nick actually knows a lot about what I'm talking about. And these ships were so brittle. They broke so easily that most people kept their boats in like a heavy amount of bubble wrap because they were so brittle and so prone to breaking because they were made out of dental resin. Couple years later, 2007, I believe. No, not 2007. So maybe the original game came out in 2007, but the Jumbo Edition came out 2015, 2016, 2018. Okay. Way overproduced. Just astronomically not what Container needed to be. It was huge. It was so bulky. It was so expensive, and it doesn't need to be. Like this game, look at this list of components. It's a couple of boats, a couple of buildings, some container ships, and some player boards, money cards. That's it. It's not a big production. It's a very small production, but then the company just way overproduced it and blew everything out, right? For this production of this game. I would love to be able to be the printer of Container and make a very nice quality but affordable version of this absolutely amazing economic game. This economic game is one of the most interesting, unique games that kind of simulates how economies work. But the best thing about it is it's so fragile, right? It's so fragile and just rides that line of if one player is just really doing something that they're not supposed to do, the entire game can kind of come off the rails. And I've seen games of Container just absolutely explode and spiral down the drain as everyone's like, yeah, I guess we're all going to go bankrupt because John decided to sell yellow containers for $6 like an idiot, right? No, but like this is like the mindset that I think a lot of people like to laugh about. But I just think that this game is so good and so unique and so special, and I would love to be able to publish Container. And so this is like my number 5 pick of games that I wish Allplay had and Allplay was making, because it's just never been available. In fact, for the Jumbo Edition, when it came out in 2018, they ran their Kickstarter, they produced the game, that was it. They just disappeared after that. They never kept the game in print. They just did that one Kickstarter print. There were barely any copies available in the aftermarket at all. So this game really has always been very difficult to get a hold of. And I would love to change that so that more people could experience how special and unique this game is.
Yeah, I endorse that. I do hope you get the chance one day to make Allplay's version of Container, because I want to play this game and I don't want to pay $300 for it. So yeah, hopefully someday. But that's going to do it for our first official episode of The Bits with Joe and Nick. Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked this video, please like it on YouTube with your thumb, and subscribe to the Bitewing Games YouTube channel, because we are going to be putting out more videos in this series. We have plans for more topics coming very soon. Our next one should be later in December, probably, assuming the scheduling works out. But do you have anything else to share, Joe, before we roll it out?
No, I think that's going to do it. This was a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying this. And again, just these are the types of conversations that me and Dick would be having, whether or not we had microphones in front of us or not, is just talking about how we take pitches, what kind of pitches we've taken, funny stories from pitches that we've received, and games we wish we would have published, right? This is like, I feel like this conversation has happened before between the two of us. So I really hope that people are listening to this and finding some enjoyment and maybe a little bit of like help and knowledge as they navigate publishing board games.
Yeah, and if you've enjoyed this topic and you have ideas for more topics, please feel free to throw your ideas in the comments. We're happy to take more ideas and keep this going for as long as we can. But that's it for today. So thank you for joining.